Hi, everyone, and welcome to Wildcard Wednesday. So glad that you could join us today. My name is Sue Miller. I'm a broadcast producer here at Geotab and your host for today's Fuel Cost Control Strategy session. Presenting today is Carrie Carter, Signature Account Advisor, Angie Milne, Solutions Engineering Manager, and Christoph Middleton, Senior Solutions Engineer. So Carrie, please kick us off.
All right, thank you so much, Sue. With the raising costs of fuel, I think everybody's most interested in how we can cut some of our costs and where we can trim down some of that extra. And some of those things are obvious and some of them are not so obvious. And really we're looking at how can we stop from wasting fuel? Why is it being consumed? It's the amounts that it's being consumed at. Can we cut that down any? What are some of the other things that we can look at to try and slim that down so your fuel costs get right in line and as tight as they possibly can be. So with that, we have lots of great stuff here today. Taking a look at some of the things that we're going to cover today, we're going to start with the Green Fleet dashboard. We're going to take a look at some custom reporting, and just got some great ones that she's pulled up there. Taking a look at the rules that are going to push those reports, and some great driver coaching opportunities. Like to keep that in a positive note, where we can coach our drivers to be better ones. And then we're going to talk about some additional resources as well. So that's kind of where we're headed in today's session. And with that, I am going to pass it over to Christoph.
Hi, thanks for the intro there, Carrie. I believe at this time we're going to give a quick demo. Right now, there is, with the imminent issues with fuel costs going up, we're kind of in a really good slot right now where as Geotab and as fleet managers, we're able to kind of tackle multiple issues at once. So all the things that are going to help fleets decrease their fuel usage and thus their cost will also aid the world by decreasing the amount of emissions. So, this has put Geotab in a really good slot. And for that reason, we actually put a good amount of resources into revamping the old Green Fleet dashboard into a new version so it can be used across all fleets throughout Geotab. So the intention with the Green Fleet dashboard is to essentially give the fleet the ability to see a holistic view of all things sustainability. And it's also kind of intended to be the very first place that you look if you're interested in either decreasing your fuel usage or increasing your fleet's sustainability or greenification. So at the very top of the dashboard, we're displaying the holistic numbers. So how much you're spending on fuel right now, how much emission that equates to, and then your total fuel usage. So you can kind of see from the start, it is a holistic view, so it's everything within your fleet. The intention with the dashboard here is that we provide you with all the details that you need and the insights that you need to direct you down a specific path. So we'll actually walk through one of these potential paths and it'll give you an idea how it works. But essentially what it'll do is it'll give you an understanding of how much you could potentially save, how much CO2 you could potentially reduce, and then directs you down a path in order to actually set up an initiative within the MyGeotab ecosystem to actually improve how much you're spending on fuel and how much emissions you're releasing. So here we're displaying a linear graph over time. So this is a big improvement over the previous version of the Green Fleet dashboard. Instead of just a couple weeks of data, we're actually able to display large chunks. So over a long period of time, up to about a year, we're able to show the data for your fleet. So you're able to see, potentially seasonal changes, as well as if you actually set up an initiative, you're able to track that over time. On this graph right now, we're displaying your fuel cost as compared to benchmarks. These benchmarks are AI derived, and they essentially tell you similar fleets within Geotab, who is kind of the average for similar fleets to yours and the best in class. And these are really, really smart benchmarks that consider vocation as well as the vehicle types that you have. So if you're mainly heavy duty in your fleet or mainly passenger, it breaks that all down and gives you a truly smart benchmark. So by looking at this graph, you're actually able to see from a daily perspective or a longer time period, if you want, exactly how much cost you could potentially save by hitting an actual achievable metric. So by either reducing your idling or doing something else. So it shows you something that you can actually achieve, which I think is really, really cool. So Angie, if you can scroll down into the internal combustion engine tab. So yeah, further along here, we're showing here just your actual fuel usage. So this is the main factor that's going to impact costs right now. Like fuel usage, fuel cost is super, super high around the globe right now. So we're trying to really decrease your fuel usage. And like I said, if you decrease your fuel usage, you're going to save money as well as CO2 emissions. So the graph kind of does the same thing by showing over time you as compared to the benchmark, and you can see how much is actual possible improvements. So if you identify, coming through the dashboard here, you identify that your fleet is actually using more fuel than what it could be. So potentially you're hovering around the benchmark and you want to hit that best in class, or you're doing worse than the benchmark and you have some potential easy savings there. At the top of the tab, you can actually see the different aspects that could be impacting your fuel usage. So Angie, do you want to just go ahead and hit idling there? If you hit these buttons, it'll actually link you out to another tab in the dashboard that displays the different aspects or criteria that impact your fuel usage. And again, overlay that with the benchmark and best in class. So you can actually scroll around this tab and see how your fleets are doing compared to what they could potentially be doing. And then from there, identify which ones are doing much worse and take action on that. So within the dashboard here, we actually link out to a KCS article in the Geotab community that actually gives you guidance on how to set up some of the custom reporting, some of the rules, and some of the initiatives within my Geotab to actually improve upon some of this driver behavior. So a lot of the stuff that Angie's going to be talking about later here in the presentation is all linked within these community articles, and we walk through guides on how you can set that up and actually run an initiative. The great thing about the Green Fleet dashboard is once that's done, let's say you decide, I'm going to start an initiative this Earth Week, you're able to continuously track after that initiative was implemented. So you can go back to the dashboard and say, here was when I started this initiative, and actually look to the past couple months and see if there is improvement on your fuel and actually track how much cost savings and emission savings that you made. So I just wanted to mention a few of the things that are coming soon with the Green Fleet dashboard. With the imminent rise in fuel, we are looking to improve the presentation of how we're displaying actual fuel costs, so you can have a better quick snapshot of how much potential savings you have either monthly or quarterly, as well as displaying the realized savings as well. On top of this, we're actually going to bring in idle fuel as well, and thus idle fuel cost. So you'll have even more data to be able to take insights and take action on. Finally, I just wanted to mention that if you have any feedbacks and questions, we have opened up an email chain. It's greenfleet@geotab.com. This one is temporary, but if you are starting to use the dashboard, we're trying to get early feedback and early questions. So in the meantime, you can actually directly contact the designers of the Green Fleet dashboard, and we can help assess your questions and take your feedback and do with it what we can. So yeah, that's it for the Green Fleet dashboard. Pass it on to Angie.
Great, thanks, Chris. So we actually had a question. I was going to say maybe wait till the end, but I think it might be good to cover now. The question was, how is cost determined for the Green Fleet dashboard? One thing we didn't show you in here is the setup of the Green Fleet dashboard. I can talk to this part, and then maybe I'll pass over to Christoph for the actual, calculation side of things. But so the way we set it up for this view that we were looking at is we were looking at the past 3 months and looking at the totals, and only looking at internal combustion engines for this fleet. But you can include, battery electric and plug-in hybrids, as well as switching up the vehicle types. But for the cost, I actually did input the national average for gas in the U.S., and you can update this at any time. Obviously, if I was in Canada, I would put it into liters, but that's how I could set it up as a user. Now, Christoph, I don't know if you want to cover, how it's actually how the cost is actually kind of determined or calculated.
Yeah, I can definitely dive into that, and thanks for touching on that, Angie. So one thing that we're also looking to improve is exactly this, how we're calculating cost. Right now, we're taking just an input of a flat rate, which I think was sufficient previously. But now, since there's a ton of variability in the cost of fuel and it's gone up so much, we actually want to be able to present that properly. So we're currently doing an investigation to figure out the best way that we can better display regional and time frame costing for fuel, and we'll factor that in. So that's one of the changes that we're going to be making very, very soon to the Green Fleet dashboard.
Perfect. All right. Thank you. I hope that answers the question. Thank you, Christoph. So, we wanted to start off by showing you the Green Fleet dashboard because it really gives you that kind of holistic view like Christoph mentioned. But, I think when we're talking about fuel costs and applying some savings, we want to understand the fleet, maybe break it down into individuals and look at, I like to say the best coaching opportunities. In other ways, you could call them, your worst offenders, but I like to be a little bit positive. So in order to do that, I think this is a really great place to start, and then we can actually hop over into the dashboard. I think this is really helpful to, like I mentioned, drill down and see the areas that we can really kind of focus on. And I kind of set up this dashboard to really showcase the fuel-related type of reports that we have out there. Now, we're not limited to these reports, but I think these are a really good collection. So I'm just going to kind of walk you through here. I wanted to touch on mileage and fuel first. So if we look at, the first report, we've got our mileage trend over the last 3 months, and you can see that I think it's helpful to have that to get an understanding of, of what your fleet is actually looking like over time. And then you can combine that by looking at the fuel trend that we see to over, and then also the idling trend. So those are great last 3 months viewpoints. And each one of these, if you're not aware of our dashboard reporting, you can actually click on them and they will open an Excel report. And you'll be able to actually drill down to a vehicle or driver level to be able to do some coaching with your drivers. Outside of that holistic kind of trend view, what we've done is we've put up here some idle specific reports, because I think we can all agree and statistics prove that the quickest way to see your return on investment essentially, or your fuel cost savings, is through idling. We've seen that with some previous fleets that we've worked with. If we can curb that idling behavior, you're definitely going to see a massive shift in your fuel spend for your fleet. So we really wanted to showcase some of these reports for you. So we've got a few different ways of looking at things. Again, depending on your business and how you want to analyze the data, you've got lots of options, as you can see. But we've got, the total overall idle cost over here, looking at the previous 30 days, and you can see we have different time frames that we can look at as well. And again, we did input the national average for the U.S., which is $4.24 a gallon. And then we can also take a look at it from a trending perspective as well. So we've got, a kind of a weekly trend looking at day by day, and it's showing you not only the cost, but how much, the duration is, how much that they are actually seeing in idle for the fleet. And then you can drill down even further by looking at the highest idle duration. So this is what I was mentioning, the best driver coaching opportunities. So it's your top 10 or your bottom 10, however you want to look at it. And so now it gives you the opportunity to really focus on the biggest bang for your buck, if you will. So we've got a list of 10 vehicles or drivers here, and we can actually see, how much they're actually idling, not only by the total duration, but I think almost more importantly, the idling percentage. So that's really just looking at the percentage of time that the vehicle was running, how much of that was spent idling. And you can see we've got some drivers here that are going up to about 20%. So we really want to be able to bring that down. One thing that you can include in the reporting, which Christoph had mentioned earlier that they're going to be implementing in the Green Fleet dashboard, is showing potential savings. So let's say, I don't know, it's going to be a really high percentage, but let's say, your fleet is averaging around 40% idle time. We want to bring that down, obviously. So you can enter in, a goal percentage. Maybe it's 5%, or maybe we want to kind of take it slowly and let's say, okay, let's get down to 30, and then we'll get down to 20. There are some ways that you can build some calculations in, and I'm going to be making an update to that daily idle cost trend to include that. So not only will you understand how much idle is costing you now, but if you had reached that goal percentage, how much additionally could you have saved? Carrie, I don't know if there's anything that you wanted to add to here before I jump into the next section.
I'm just thinking about the idling and where you're at today. And if you haven't spent any time looking at idle, Angie's not out of range there. We've seen lots of fleets at 35 and 40%, which is really scary, but it does still exist. So really, like the first place we can go looking is let's find out what that idle time is. Let's break it down. Let's find out those, those outliers and those high idlers and try to trim that down first. But honestly, we've had a fleet, and it doesn't matter whether it's 30,000 in the fleet or whether it's 30 in the fleet. Your idle time is a big one. And we have seen great savings just based on that, looking at idling, spending a year only on idling. And you can actually see that bringing your costs down on your fuel. So great way to start from it. And Angie, I pass it back over to you.
Perfect, thank you. All right. So, we talk about idling. That is definitely the number one quickest way to see those fuel cost savings. But there are some additional factors that go into fuel costs, which may not seem so obvious. And I think they are still really important, though. The second thing that we wanted to cover is speeding. I think when we talk about speeding, normally you just think about, dangerous driving, making sure that, there's not any possible collisions or anything like that, but it definitely does tie into fuel spend. I think I looked up a stat recently that said, according to the American Trucking Association, a truck traveling at 75 miles per hour consumes 27% more fuel than one driving at 65 miles per hour. Another really good statistic that we look at is you're going to lose about 1 mile per gallon for every 10 miles per hour over the posted limit that a vehicle is driving. So as you can see, we have a huge potential for savings there as well. It may not be as easy to apply actual costs to, speeding data, but we know that it's tied together. So again, we've got some really great driver coaching opportunities here as well. And we've broken them down into two different ways of looking at it. And again, there are multiple ways that we can kind of slice and dice this data, but we wanted to give you a really nice, good snapshot here. So the first one we're looking at is, highest max speeds. So again, I am looking at everything here in gallons and miles per hour. So this is literally just what is the maximum speed that the vehicle hit in the last week. So right away, we can see that first vehicle hit a maximum of 89 miles per hour, which is pretty fast. So, looking at that statistic that I was talking about before about, a truck traveling at 75 consumes 27% more fuel. Well, this one's traveling at 89%, so we can do some math there to get us an idea. But the main kind of takeaway on this is we want to be able to talk to these drivers and implement some ways that we can help bring these down, the idle as well as the max speeds, which we'll talk about in the next section. Then we've got the highest violation. So we're not necessarily looking at the maximum speeds, but we're looking at an incident count, essentially, of how many times they've broken the speeding exception rule, which we'll cover. So, we've got one vehicle that's broken the speeding exception rule, which I think right now by default is set up as 10 miles per hour over the posted limit. And they've broken that 143 times in the last week. Pretty significant. But again, kind of what we looked at with the idling, the speeding percentage is also really important. Of the times that they were driving, what percentage of that time were they speeding? I mean, we're seeing some numbers go up to 60% here, which is very high. So again, more driver coaching opportunities. Now, the other thing that, again, I think might even be less obvious is aggressive driving. Might be more obvious than speeding, but these are what we like to call the ABCs, right? A hard acceleration, harsh braking, and harsh cornering. I think the most important one out of these three would be the hard acceleration, and it almost kind of ties into high RPMs as well. If we have more incidents of vehicles that are just kind of putting their foot to the floor when they're starting off a trip, or maybe they're stopped at a light and they're just, accelerating really hard, they're burning more fuel, right? So again, might be a little bit more difficult to apply a cost to it, but if we can bring those events down and we can do some coaching with those drivers, then inevitably we will see the fuel costs go down. So so the rules, all of these reports that we were just looking at are utilizing our rules engine. So, we can create those hard acceleration, braking, and cornering rules. And as you can see, if there's a mixed fleet, you want to make sure that we're creating separate rules for each vehicle type, because those values are definitely going to change, from a passenger car to a heavy truck, or even just a cube van that's got, a certain kind of load type. You're going to see some changes there as well. So you want to make sure that if you do have a mixed fleet, that you're not just utilizing these default rules, but you're customizing them you might have a grouping structure set up so that you've grouped your vehicle types, between passenger, truck, cube van, and heavy duty, and applying the rules to those groups so that you're making sure that your data is as accurate as it can be. Incidentally, the speeding rule that we were talking about before in those dashboard reports, this is the rule that we were talking about. So it is one of the default rules within the My Geotab system. And we're looking at posted speed limit data from different map providers. And so it's really great that we are able to kind of index that data, and we can actually kind of combine that with the vehicle data. So we want to know, for instance, in this particular database that I'm in, we're looking at I've got it in kilometers per hour here, but I'm looking at 10 kilometers per hour over the posted limit. Obviously, depending on your user settings, it can be in miles per hour as well. But I did kind of touch on another rule that when I was talking about those other reports, and that's talking about we call it engine abuse, but it's really kind of over-revving, right? So we can create some rules that look at if a vehicle is over-revving. Again, you might want to have separate rules depending on the vehicle types that you have in there. If we think of like a passenger vehicle, probably 3,500 RPMs is going to be enough because I think it's pretty rare for you to hit that. And if you do, then there's an issue. Whereas, for a heavy truck, it might look a little bit differently. Again, that kind of ties in with the hard acceleration. I think these two are very closely aligned, and it's a great way to identify some driver behaviors that might possibly need to change. Now, one thing we can do with our rules, and I'll just hop back up over to the speeding, is, if you have vehicles that are on Pro Plus and active tracking, then we can actually set up notifications or driver feedback to the driver themselves. And there's different ways that we can do that, have it be 3 times, rapidly 10 times. Even with our Go Talk, you could have it actually speak to them so they know exactly what's happening. Again, this is a great way to be able to coach the drivers on top of the reports. You don't want to have one or the other. You want to work on those together. So, I think the way I typically tend to look at it is we're going to take a look at those reports on the dashboard, which can also be emailed to you, supervisor on a weekly or monthly basis, depending on how actively you want to be looking at the information, identifying those drivers and identifying, hey, we've got an actual issue here. Let's set up some driver feedback. So I mentioned, for more kind of a holistic approach with all the vehicles in the database, if they are on Pro Plus and active tracking, you can set up this type of driver feedback here. But if you want to take a more kind of targeted approach and you've identified those top 10 or 5 driver coaching opportunities, you can really bring it down to the vehicle level. So for instance, here, I picked on Carrie. She was driving earlier, and I said, do you mind if I turn on some beeping for you? So hopefully it didn't cause too much of a problem for you, Carrie. But this is a really great way to target individual vehicles. You can also set this up bulk as well. So if you're in the vehicle list, you can select all of them and set these up for everybody. I think this is a really good way to ensure that you're getting real-time feedback within the vehicles. So some of the options that we have here are things that we've touched on throughout this webinar here. The first one being engine RPM. So, Carrie's vehicle is a more lighter duty vehicle, so I set it up at 3,500. Beeping, so again, it's similar to our rules engine where we can select, if they've been idling for 5 minutes, I wanted to start beeping at them. And it will beep incessantly until they either shut off the vehicle or start driving again. So it's a really good way to kind of reinforce that behavior. And then additionally, we've got a speed warning here, which, because this is device side, we don't have the posted speed limit information, but I still think this is a really good way to go about it. If you have fleets that are, mostly driving on highways, I think this is a really good setup. You can, have it start beeping at a certain speed. I I put it at 78 because I didn't want it to start beeping at Carrie. I wanted to put it up really high, but hey, we had a driver that was driving 89 miles per hour, so maybe this would be good for him. So it'll start beeping at them once they hit that speed, and until they go down to this stop beeping speed, it won't stop beeping. So once they hit that speed, it will stop beeping. So another way to reinforce that behavior. Additionally, we have the dangerous driving, so we could enable that as well. And this is also very helpful because, if you do have a mixed fleet, you can set it up on an individual basis as well. Filter by group up in the top left here and just select those vehicles and set it up over there. Again, Carrie, I'm going to throw it over to you. Anything additional that you would like to add here?
No, I think, Ange, you're hitting all of the points that we really need to focus in on. You did mention something about combining all of these things, and I think it's important to note, to start with, we need to assess what it is that you have in front of you, meaning if you're going to look at idling first or speeding or a combination of all three. I do stress here, you're going to want to start in one place. So, if you want to start with idling and you jump in, let's look at that idle report. Now, let's identify where you can see that those things need to be trimmed down and come up with a plan, come up with a policy, come up with a plan in order to do that. So look at those outliers for those drivers and then let them know, okay, guys, as we're trying to cut our costs on fuel and we need to really focus in on that, we're going to start the beeps. So we're going to get your beeps going on idling. And then once you feel that you're in line with that and it is trimmed down, then you can move on to the next thing. Then you can look at speeding or vice versa, whichever one you have an issue with first. So, management by measurement. Let's measure it first. Let's take a look at it, and then you can manage to it. And it follows through with all of these things that Ange has covered. So, reporting it, taking a look at those rules, getting them set up, and then continuing on that pathway to that driver coaching is going to be the key to kind of pull this whole thing together.
That is the key, is you want to make sure that you're kind of taking like a multi-pronged approach, essentially, right? So you're identifying all of the key areas. Again, like Carrie said, I think idling is definitely the number one place that you want to focus on first, and doing one thing at a time is really beneficial. But, and it's not just reporting, because we can look at data all we want, but if we're not taking action on it, then it's really kind of doesn't really mean anything, essentially. So you want to make sure that you're obviously, if you've got supervisors that are sitting down with the drivers and, helping them understand, how it's affecting, the fleet, the fuel economy, but also implementing some of these driver kind of feedback features as well.
So with that, Ange, do we have anything more to talk about in there?
Not in here. I think we were just going to touch on some of the additional features and resources that we have.
Yeah. So, okay. So thanks, Ange. This was great. As I said to everybody, we do have these reports. If you don't have them, just ask for them. We have got some great added things also to add here. I just want to, we're not going to fully elaborate on all these things. I just want to talk about them. So some of them have been covered before in Wildcard Wednesdays. And, things like Ange has up there right now, our fleet industry trends. That's a great one to take a look at. Your idling percentages by vehicle vocation. So depending on what industry you're in, take a look at what your benchmarking is. It's a good one to identify that, to say, how can I get better at it? Nothing is better than putting up a competition of some kind. Everybody likes to win. Some other things that we've got that we look at are, there is a fleet saving summary report. It is being updated right now, but it still exists as it is today, and it's still a very good one. It is out there inside your database, and if not, again, you can always reach out and look for it. Lots of great savings inside of a database to look at from there, and it looks at all kinds of things like your idling and your aggressive driving and maintenance and all of those things. We've also got something called the Analytics Lab, which also takes a look at many different pieces that you have inside your data and analyzes that, and just pulled it up there. There's, as I said, there's some great stuff there. A couple of other things to comment on. There is a driver scorecard. That's always a good one that's available as well. Tire pressure. That is something, it's probably a smaller piece, but it's definitely something that does also account for some of your fuel spend. We have, sometimes we're getting tire pressure, we're not getting it on all vehicles, and it certainly depends on the age of the vehicles as well. We're always getting better at that. But if we don't have it, it can also be a marketplace partner. We do have some partners up there. Ange is showing that right now. We do have some marketplace partners that have tire sensors. Those are great ones to look at also. And I'm going to finish off here just by talking about the EVSA, which is our electric vehicle suitability assessment tool. It is a great tool. Comes around, what are we doing in the EV world? Is anybody adding to their fleet with EVs? And everybody is coming around to, yes, we're starting to look at it, or no, we haven't started yet. We don't know where to start. Some people have gone much farther than that and have it in their fleet, but they want to know more about it. So the suitability assessment tool will help you, looking at the data that you have today, it will help you assess and decide on which vehicles would be best to switch over into the electric world, if you will, which fleet would be best to switch to electric vehicle. And growing into that, it is also looking obviously inside the fleet part, but it also grows right into the database itself, because we also look at electric vehicle charging, and that fits right into the fuel report. So the EVSA is an excellent tool to get started with to help you assess that. Once you get going, there's so much electric vehicle information that is right inside the database today that you can get all of that data and continue to manage your fleet by it. So there's lots of things for you to look at, focusing back in on those reports that Ange has and she shared with us. If you need them, you can reach out to your reseller. If you aren't sure who to reach out to, you can always reach out to one of us. We are certainly available to help you. The geotab.com site, I suggest the marketplace for your tire sensors as well. And if you're not sure of that link, it is marketplace.geotab.com. The Green Fleet dashboard is also available there, as well as the EV suitability assessment. Yeah, really with that, Sue, I think I'm going to hand it back over to you, unless we have some more questions that we want to talk about as well.
Thank you, Carrie, and Angie and Christoph. This was a great presentation, and we do have some more questions. The audience is very curious about a few things. One of the earlier questions, and I believe maybe Christoph touched on it, but how is cost determined for the Green Fleet dashboard?
So currently, we just kind of take a flat value input. So however, the current price of fuel in your region, you can plug that in. But because, the variability in fuel costs over the last few months and the last few weeks, it's obviously really important to be able to present proper costing numbers on those graphs that we're displaying. So part of the revamp that we're working on right now is to evaluate some of the sources out there that give us regional and accurate and daily cost of fuel in different regions to implement that. So it will no longer be a flat rate calculation. We'll actually be able to get some estimates of how much fuel was in different regions and plug that into the dashboard to get you more insightful graphs.
Excellent, thank you. Another question is, can you change the benchmark value?
I believe that question is related to the Green Fleet dashboard.
So for the Green Fleet dashboard, no, you can't. So these benchmarks are smart benchmarks determined based on your fleet's driving patterns as well as which vehicles are driving. So it's to give you insight into what is technically possible for you to do. So how much fuel you can technically decrease and how much cost you can technically save in practice. That said, I want to also include that I think there's some benchmarking in some of the custom reports. So I wasn't sure if the question was related to Green Fleet dashboard or the custom reports, but some of the custom reports, you can edit this. So you can plug in, your potential gain for idling. If you want to decrease your idling by 15%, for example, you can plug that into the custom report and get some insights that way. And I think something we were talking about just before this meeting was that you could potentially leverage the Green Fleet dashboard to get a good idea for what to input within these custom reports. So the Green Fleet dashboard can kind of give you an idea of what's possible. And then from there, if you want to set realistic goals, you can try to hit the benchmark that we're giving you. Or if you want to set really, really optimistic goals, you can try to hit that best in class, which is the top 10% of fleets, and plug that into your custom reports. So yeah, everything can kind of work together. But for now, the Green Fleet dashboard is supposed to be kind of insightful, and the custom reports will help you take action on that.
Excellent. Thank you, Christoph. Do you separate manual trucks versus automatic transmission trucks to monitor fuel and shifting patterns, et cetera?
Well, I think that really comes down to how we create the report around it. I mean, we have the standard report that Anne showed, and then we would customize it. If you've got different types in your fleet, then each one needs to be customized for it. I think one of the other questions that I'm going to talk about as well is, if the fleet is different, we start out with one report. The fleet is different, it's got to be separated. We can't look at it all in the same place. We're talking about different types of vehicles here, so let's get them separated out. It is one report, but you end up creating it twice. Why? Because we need to monitor different things. To add to that, if you look at things like RPMs for different types of fleets, sometimes an RPM is going to show up and it's going to make a difference, and sometimes it's not. And if you look at empty miles, I was asked about this question the other day, is there a way for us to see empty miles? That, for those of you that aren't familiar with it, it's when you got a tractor running without a trailer on the back. You know what? If we look at the RPMs, I bet you we could figure it out. So there's different combinations that can happen, and the basis of these reports can be customized to fit that. It does take work. It does take, sometimes we need to look at that RPM. I just got asked the question here about, can we tell PTO? And the PTO, with figuring out what your power takeoff looks like, you'd have to look at the vehicle first without PTO turned on and see what your RPMs are at, and then see if you can identify that the RPMs go up when the PTO is turned on. So building that report out of the standard one is really what we would want to take a look at. An exceptions report is probably the best way to look at that.
Yeah, I think you definitely got it there. Yeah, one of the things we can definitely look for is the elevated engine RPM, like you had mentioned there. There are some assets that we can actually see PTO data coming through from the computer. Not always, but that is something that we could look at as well. But I think, Carrie, you're right on. Like, we want to get that initial kind of benchline of data to understand what the typical use looks like. There are other things that you can utilize as well. If you know that the PTO is always going to be used in a certain area, you could create geofences, and then you can have that be part of your criteria for the rule building that you're looking at. So, I only want to look at when they're inside of these type of zones, and I want to know if the RPM goes above a certain level. And again, it does take some analyzing of the data ahead of time to understand what that RPM value is that we're looking at. I think a lot of times for things like this, we want to actually have it kind of test in the field, have someone turn the PTO on, have them turn it off, and take a look at what is going on. There might be other data points that we can look at as well, such as voltage is one thing I can think of.
And there's lots of things that are around that too, right? If we're getting it through the engine, it's real easy to pick up. If we're not, how else can we play with that to make that work? So these are the starting points, and I think the low-hanging fruit to help you get your fuel costs in line, but there's lots of other things that we can use as tools to get it even closer.
Okay. Another question here. Is there a way to tie in a small LED panel that will give a visual alert of what's going on inside the vehicle?
Yeah, I know there's a way. It's been a while since I've touched on anything like that, but I know there is an IOX that we could actually utilize. That
output with an LED light up on the dash that will do it. We can do that for different things, but it's the output IOX.
Thank you. That's the one. And if you want to know more, definitely reach out to us or your reseller.
All righty. Thank you, everybody, for your participation today. I also just wanted to point out that Carrie mentioned the Analytics Lab, and you may want to check out the March 9th Wildcard Wednesday, where we did a welcome to Geotab's Data and Analytics product suite. You can view that on our YouTube channel on the 2022 Wildcard Wednesday playlist. So that's a wrap for today's Wildcard Wednesday. And until next time, on behalf of myself and everyone here at Geotab, thank you for joining us today. And we'll see you all next time. Same Geotab time, same Geotab channel.